EU cutting off nose to spite face. Humphrys brilliant Galileo blast at German bureaucrat. Speaking on BBC Radio 4 Today program, German political scientist Nicolai von Ordarza was faced with the threat posed by the UK planning to develop its own space program with Japan or Australia post-Brexit, if the EU decided to exclude Britain from Galileo. BBC host John Humphrys suggested the EU would not only lose the UK's input in the future development of its program but would also have to face a new big competitor on the market. Mr. Humphrys blasted, "The European Union is cutting off its nose to spite its face, to use an English expression, isn't it? Because you would lose our input, you would lose our money and there would be another competitor." Mr. von Ordarza replied, "Well, certainly the European side and the Germans and the European Commission are sorry to see the UK leave. We are sorry to leave the UK leaving the European Union. But what they are saying is Galileo is not an international program, it's an EU program. And that means for the strategic autonomy of the EU it has to retain certain components within EU member states. And there's an opening to discuss how the UK and other third countries might have access to the more encrypted part, and I think they're certainly open to doing that, but what they are saying, and I think this is very supported in Berlin, is that if the UK does leave it cannot expect to have a seat at the table when the decisions are being taken, for instance on how the encrypted program works. I think for now the threat of the UK developing their own program, which will cost billions of pounds potentially, sounds very shallow. I think the position is, therefore, yes, we can negotiate about a further access for the UK, but it certainly will be less than an EU member." Tory peer David Willetts, also on the radio debating panel, snapped back at the German scientist claiming mere access to the encrypted system without a seat at the decision-making table would be useless. The Conservative peer pointed out, in order for our military to use it for targeting missiles, they will want to know exactly how the encrypted system is functioning. They have to be privy to those discussions, they can't just be a passive recipient. You have to understand the full operation. Despite threats of British threats to launch its own domestic rival, the EU has stood firm on its position of no third country access to Galileo's PRS, but has said other public uses will continue to be no limits access for the UK. A British absence from Galileo will, however, significantly hamstring the project, according to a UK government source familiar with the Brexit negotiations. They insist there will be significant consequences for Brussels if the Commission maintains its negotiating position. The source adds, there will be very large operational capability gaps on day one, with no obvious ways of plugging them. We are at the heart of PRS, and the intelligence? We are at the heart of that too. We are so integral to the success of Galileo, it's very difficult to see where the win is for the Commission.